You know, usually when we set out to build something, say a custom house, there is this expectation of a really clear, very distinct separation between the tools we use and the final product we get.
Right, the process versus the destination.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. You bring in this loud, dirty, gas-guzzling excavator to dig out the foundation.
Which is incredibly messy.
Oh, it's chaotic. You pour concrete, you use harsh chemical solvents, you got sawdust flying literally everywhere, and there's all this, ugly scaffolding wrapping the entire structure.
But the house itself, the destination you eventually move into, that can still be perfectly quiet and clean and serene.
Yeah, because when the job is done, the workers pack up, you leave the muddy boots outside, the heavy machinery gets loaded onto a flatbed, and it's just driven away.
The scaffolding comes down.
Right. The destination, that beautiful house, is completely untainted by the incredibly messy, loud reality of the journey required to build it. And we are deeply conditioned to view all progress exactly like that.
We really are. And it is incredibly comforting to view the world through that lens, We love to compartmentalize.
Oh, definitely.
We naturally separate the chaotic, sometimes really unpleasant process of getting something done from the pristine, idealized result we are aiming for. I mean, we do it in our careers, we do it in our relationships, and we certainly do it in our politics.
But here's the problem, and this is exactly what we are exploring today with you. When you step out of the realm of physical construction and into the world of social change or human systems or philosophy, that separation completely vanishes.
It just doesn't exist.
It doesn't. The excavator does not drive away. In human systems, we are looking at a reality where the tools you use actually mutate. They permanently embed themselves into the walls of the house you are trying to build.
Which is, logically speaking, the absolute definition of a structural paradox. The things you use to create the outcome literally become the outcome.
You cannot pack them up.
Right, you can't just drive them away.
So, welcome to a highly specialized, intensely focused deep dive. Today, we are taking you into a microscopic analysis of a piece of source material that tackles this exact paradox head-on.
And this is going to be a bit different from our usual approach.
Yeah, normally we take a pretty wide lens, right? We look at broad trends, sweeping historical movements, massive data sets. But today, the mission is entirely different. We are zooming all the way in.
All the way in.
We are going to look at just one single pivotal paragraph from a document called the Peaceful Windled Manifesto, version 1.0.
And just to set the stage for you listening, this manifesto is a vast, comprehensive document. It covers an incredible amount of ground.
It's massive.
If you were to read the whole thing, you'd find sections on regenerative economics, open source educational ecosystems, the deep mechanics of digital democracy, complex existential risk management. I mean, it is a blueprint for a completely restructured global society.
But we are going to do something highly unusual today. We're going to put blinders on.
Total tunnel vision.
We are actively ignoring the rest of the manifesto to focus entirely on one specific paragraph. It's point number 8, which is simply titled Ends and Means.
And the reason we are doing this is that this single paragraph is essentially the fundamental operating system for the entire philosophy of the document.
It's the core engine.
Exactly. The argument here is that if you do not fundamentally grasp the mechanics of this one point, the rest of the manifesto, the economics, the democracy, the education, it's just noise. It won't work.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what's fascinating to me is how incredibly rare it is to find a document that packs so much into so little space.
It's dense.
It's extremely dense. This single paragraph is roughly 60 words long. Yet, as we're going to see, it somehow manages to weave botanical, biological, evolutionary, and mathematical concepts into a single cohesive argument.
It is layered. And frankly, it takes a sledgehammer to the way we usually justify our actions to ourselves.
It really does.
The depth of this single point absolutely warrants a full hour of exploration. The reason we need to spend so much time dissecting these 60 words is that they are designed to completely dismantle a deeply ingrained, almost universal human illusion about how progress is made.
It removes all of our usual excuses.
Every single one of them.
So we are going to break this paragraph down line by line, concept by concept, and look at the absolutely unified worldview it presents. And I want to be clear with you listening. We are treating this text not as a political argument to be endorsed or condemned.
Right. We aren't here to take sides or advocate for the ultimate political goals of the manifesto.
Exactly. We are just here to impartially analyze the fascinating, rigid internal logic of the text itself. So let's start with the very first sentence of point 8.
Let's do it.
It reads, our formula is A peaceful world through peaceful means. We are convinced there is no path to peace. Peace is the path.
The phrasing here is not accidental at all. Notice the word they use right at the start, formula.
Right, our formula is
In our common vernacular, when we talk about social change, we use words like hope or goal or vision or struggle, but they chose formula.
which feels very clinical.
It is. A formula isn't a suggestion. It isn't a vague aspiration. In mathematics or physics, a formula dictates a mechanistic reality. It states that specific, measurable inputs will inevitably, without exception, yield specific, measurable outputs.
Like E equals MC squared. It just is.
Exactly. The Manifesto is stating, right out of the gate, that they view human action and societal development as possessing the exact same strict causality as a scientific equation. They are stripping away the romance and the ideology.
And the output they are talking about in this formula is a peaceful world. And the required input is peaceful means. But it's that next clause that really requires a massive cognitive shift for me.
The part about the path.
Yeah, there is no path to peace. Peace is the path. Linguistically, that is a complete rejection of how we normally use language to describe goals.
It is a total collapse of the journey and the destination. Usually, we think of a goal as a place we arrive at after a long, distinct journey.
Right.
You travel the path, and that path might be arduous. It might involve compromise. It might even require violence or deceit. And then eventually, you arrive at the destination of peace.
You finally get there.
But the text explicitly rejects this sequence. By stating that peace is the path, it makes peace a daily operational mode. It is an ongoing process that you are enacting right now in the present tense.
So it's not a utopian future state that you get to unlock at some later date after you've done all the dirty work.
No, not at all.
But let me challenge that, because human nature is entirely built around delayed gratification. It's like trying to get healthy by eating junk food and saying you'll start eating healthy after you reach your goal weight. It doesn't work mechanically.
That's a great analogy.
We endure pain now for a reward later. We study all night to pass the test tomorrow. We endure a grueling workout to get healthy next year. So I have to ask, how does this formula force a complete psychological reset for anyone trying to create change? If I am facing a massive injustice, why can't I use a little bit of force, a little bit of coercion, just to secure the path so that we can all enjoy the destination later?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that delayed gratification only works when the pain you endure does not fundamentally corrupt the system you are trying to build.
Oh, that makes sense.
Studying all night doesn't destroy your brain, it builds it. The grueling workout builds the muscle. But in human systems, when you use coercion or violence to build a peaceful society, you are fundamentally altering the architecture of that society.
You're poisoning the well.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of it. When you frame peace as a distant destination, it creates a massive moral loophole in the present. It allows individuals, governments, and movements to justify horrific things right now, today.
Under the guise that these actions are merely temporary steps on the path to that glorious, peaceful destination.
Right. It's the ultimate permission slip.
I'm just doing this terrible thing so my children can have peace.
Precisely. By demanding that peace is the path, the Manifesto completely removes that loophole. It strips away the excuse of temporary violence or necessary cruelty.
It forces absolute accountability into the present moment.
Yes. If you are not acting peacefully right now, you are not on the path to peace. You are on a different path entirely, one that will logically, mechanistically lead to a very different destination.
That demands an incredible amount of discipline, because the path is hard and the temptation to take a shortcut is always there. Especially when you're facing an adversary who does not play by those rules, the immediate overwhelming instinct is to fight fire with fire.
Which is very human.
Very human. Which leads us directly into the next sentence of the paragraph. If peace is the path, we have to look directly at the most common, most seductive excuse humans use to step off that path and fight fire with fire.
Right. The Manifesto addresses this head on.
It says, we reject the illusion that the end justifies the means.
I really want to draw your attention to the specific word choice here. Illusion. This is critical.
Why that word specifically?
Because the authors could have said, we reject the immorality that the end justifies the means. Or, we believe it is unethical to say the end justifies the means. But they deliberately avoided ethical language. They used cognitive, descriptive language.
An illusion.
Yes. An illusion is a functional impossibility. It is a trick of the mind. It's literally a mirage in the desert.
And when you see a mirage of water in the desert, It doesn't matter how genuinely you believe the water is there.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't matter how thirsty you are, how pure your intentions are, or how noble your reasons for wanting the water are. You can sprint toward it with all the moral clarity in the world. But when you get there, you're just going to find sand.
That is exactly the argument. The text is stating that the idea that a noble goal can sanitize terrible actions is fundamentally a glitch in human reasoning.
A glitch. I like that.
It is deeply embedded in our history, this idea that if the target is righteous enough, the arrows we fire don't matter. But the Manifesto is stating objectively that this is a false construct. The end cannot justify the means because, mechanically, the end is created by the means.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but practically speaking, let me stop you right there and play devil's advocate for the listener.
Yeah.
Because this feels like a massive leap.
Okay, go ahead.
This is where a lot of people are going to push back. Hasn't history taught us that sometimes you really do have to make hard choices? You know the old saying, sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Sure, we've all heard that.
If you are facing a tyrannical regime or a hostile corporate takeover, or even just a deeply toxic person in your life, sometimes you have to play hardball. Why is the Manifesto so absolute in calling this an illusion? Are they just being hopelessly naive about how the real world operates?
The omelet analogy is actually brilliant to bring up because it perfectly illustrates the linguistic trap the Manifesto is warning against. Let's really analyze that analogy.
Okay, let's break some eggs.
When you make an omelet, the eggs are just raw, inanimate ingredients. You break the shells, you scramble the yolks, you apply extreme heat, and they transform into something else entirely. The violence of breaking the shell is erased by the cooking process.
Right. The omelet doesn't look, act, or function like a broken egg.
Exactly. The end product absorbs and sanitizes the messy process.
The destination is completely separate from the journey. The ingredient is consumed by the final dish.
But the Manifesto's underlying logic argues that human actions, societal structures, and ethical choices do not function like eggs in a pan. We are not dealing with inanimate objects. We are dealing with human psychology and systemic momentum.
So the ingredient isn't consumed.
No. The means you use actively alter the end you are trying to reach. You never actually arrive at the pure, idealized omelet you envisioned if your hands are dirty from the means.
Can we look at a historical example of this mechanism in action, just to prove the text's point about it being a cognitive illusion rather than just a moral failing?
Absolutely. Let's look at the French Revolution.
Okay, classic example.
The initial end goal, the destination they wanted, was incredibly noble. Liberty, equality, fraternity. A republic of virtue built on the rights of man, overthrowing centuries of oppressive, absolute monarchy.
A completely justifiable righteous end. I don't think anyone argues with the initial goal there.
Right. But then they encountered massive resistance. Foreign armies were invading. Royalists were plotting from within. So to protect this noble end, the leaders, specifically Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, decided they needed a temporary, highly effective means.
Oh.
They instituted the Reign of Terror, the guillotine. They believed that to protect the Republic of Virtue, they had to temporarily suspend liberty, execute dissidents, and use overwhelming state terror.
So the end, a free republic, justified the means, mass executions.
Exactly. Break a few aristocratic eggs to make a democratic omelet.
Right. But what happened mechanically?
The terror didn't magically vanish once the immediate threats were dealt with. The means, the paranoia, the surveillance, the political violence, the suspension of due process, they became the defining characteristics of the end.
Wow.
The Republic of Virtue never materialized. Instead, the society became utterly consumed by fear. The mechanism of the guillotine required constant feeding. Eventually, it consumed Robespierre himself.
It turned on its creator.
Yes. And the ultimate end of the French Revolution wasn't a stable, peaceful democracy. It was the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, a military dictator who crowned himself emperor. The means they chose literally murdered the end they desired.
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah.
Because nobody wakes up and says, let's build an empire of paranoia and execute everyone. They woke up and said, let's build a free society.
But because they chose terror as the tool became the society.
You can't separate the ingredient from the final dish when the ingredient is the moral and structural fabric of the situation. The broken eggs in a social context, the broken trust, the broken lives, the broken norms, they don't disappear into a fluffy omelet. They become the foundational cracks in whatever new society you just built.
And that is exactly why the text calls it an illusion. It is mechanically impossible to achieve a free society using the tools of tyranny, just as it is mechanically impossible to reach an oasis if you are walking toward a mirage.
The action itself dictates the destination.
Always.
Okay, that definitely clarifies the systemic failure of the ends justify the means argument. And to explain exactly why this happens, why the means so rigidly dictate the end, the Manifesto actually makes a hard pivot here.
It does. It moves away from abstract philosophy and historical observation, and it introduces its first powerful metaphor.
Moving straight into biology, the text states simply, means are seeds, the end is the tree.
This botanical metaphor is incredibly elegant because it grounds a really complex philosophical idea in a highly observable law of nature.
Let's unpack the biology of a seed.
A seed is not just a random piece of matter. It is a highly compressed storage device containing the entire genetic blueprint of a future organism. It is entirely deterministic.
It's essentially a zip file of a tree. It has all the code already written inside it.
That's a perfect analogy. The instructions are hard-coded into it.
Yeah.
If you hold an apple seed in your hand, you are holding the deterministic future of an apple tree.
Right.
You cannot plant that apple seed in the most fertile soil, water it meticulously, tend to it every single day, and then fall to your knees and pray for an oak tree to grow.
It's just not going to happen.
No. The outcome is locked in by the nature of the input. Nature does not care about your intentions, your hopes, or your prayers. It only cares about the code within the seed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. And let me push back on this biological determinism for a second, because this is where metaphors can sometimes break down. A seed is a closed biological system. It has no agency. It has no brain. Human beings, human societies, we are open systems. We have free will. We can change our minds.
Sure.
If I'm leading a team at work and we are under a massive stressful deadline and I snap at my team, I yell, I use fear and coercion to get the project done on time, according to this metaphor, I just planted a toxic seed.
You did.
But humans aren't plants. I can come into the office tomorrow, call a meeting, apologize sincerely, and we can course correct. I have permanently genetically modified my team. So isn't the Manifesto stretching biology a bit too far to prove a point here?
It's a very fair challenge, but you have to look at how systems build momentum. Yes, as an individual, you have free will to apologize, but the text is talking about the operational formula of a system.
Okay, explain that.
When you apologize, what are you actually doing within the framework of this metaphor? You are planting a new seed, a seed of humility and reconciliation, and that new seed will grow its own tree. But the text argues that the original seed you planted, the fear and coercion, it didn't magically disappear because you apologized. It still germinated.
Ah, so the tree of fear is still growing in the background, even if I'm now actively trying to water a tree of reconciliation.
Exactly. Your team might forgive you, but they have now learned a structural truth about how you operate under pressure. They have learned that when push comes to shove, coercion is on the table.
Right, the mask slipped.
And that knowledge alters their behavior. Next time a deadline approaches, they might hide bad news from you out of fear. They might start blaming each other to avoid your wrath. The seed of coercion grows into a tree of systemic dysfunction.
Man, that is so true.
Let's look at a macro-level example in the corporate world that perfectly illustrates this deterministic biology. Let's look at Enron.
Okay, the energy company that became basically synonymous with massive corporate fraud in the early 2000s.
Right. If you look at Enron's stated ends, their corporate values, which, by the way, were literally carved in marble in their lobby.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. They were communication, respect, integrity, and excellence. That was the oak tree they claimed they wanted to grow.
Sounds great on paper.
But what were their means? What were the seeds they were actually planting every single day? They instituted a performance review system called Rank and Yank.
Rank and yank. That just sounds brutal.
It was. Every year, employees were graded on a curve, and the bottom 15% were systematically fired, regardless of their actual objective performance.
So it was a system of absolute cutthroat internal competition. You didn't just have to succeed, you had to make sure your colleagues fail so you didn't end up in that bottom 15%.
Precisely. That system was the seed. The company's leadership planted a seed of hyper-competitive paranoia and survival at all costs. You cannot plant a seed of paranoid survivalism and expect a tree of integrity and communication to grow.
It's biologically impossible in this metaphorical framework.
Exactly. What actually grew? A massive tree of accounting fraud. because the employees, terrified of being yanked, began hiding losses, creating shadow companies, manipulating energy markets.
Just to survive the system.
Right. The outcome was locked in by the nature of the input. Enron's leadership might have had the genuine intention of building an excellent, innovative company, but the means they used to motivate their employees were toxic, and so the entire corporate structure became fatally toxic.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
The action itself contains the DNA of the result. You cannot harvest trust if you plant fear.
You really can't.
The text is telling us that we will harvest exactly what we sow, with zero exceptions. It turns social change or business management or even personal relationships into an agricultural science. A farmer doesn't gamble on what crop will come up. A farmer knows exactly what they will harvest based entirely on what they sowed.
And that removes the concept of luck from the equation of peace. We often treat social harmony like a gamble. We think, if I just yell this one time, maybe I'll get lucky and they'll just fall in line and everything will be fine.
Right.
The botanical metaphor says no. If you sow violence to achieve peace, you will harvest a violent peace.
A violent peace. That is a chilling oxymoron. But it perfectly describes situations where the act of fighting stops, but the underlying coercion, fear, and state control remain. You have a peaceful society, but only because everyone is terrified to speak out.
The seed of violence created a tree of suppressed violence.
Wow. And this organic, natural rule, it scales up. We've talked about individuals apologizing. We've talked about a corporation like Enron. But the Manifesto takes this concept and applies it to the largest power structures imaginable. Governments, revolutions, global systems.
It scales all the way to the top.
Which brings us to the Manifesto's next crucial concept. The text declares, we recognize the law of path dependence. The methods used to achieve power become the structural DNA of the future system.
Here, the text shifts from botany into evolutionary biology and systems theory. The law of path dependence is not just a metaphor. It is a very real, established concept in economics, sociology, and political science.
For the listener who might not be familiar, what exactly is it?
At its core, path dependence means that the decisions and options presented to people in the present are strictly limited by the decisions they, or their predecessors, have made in the past.
The classic example of this, the one that always helps me visualize it, is the QWERTY keyboard on our phones and laptops.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
We still use this incredibly awkward layout today, where the most commonly used letters are just scattered everywhere, not because it's the most efficient way to type, it's actually highly inefficient, but it was designed in the 1870s for early mechanical typewriters.
Right, to solve a very specific physical problem.
Exactly. The keys were arranged specifically to slow typists down so the physical metal arms wouldn't jam together.
And once that keyboard became standard, typing schools taught it, generations of typists built muscle memory around it, typewriter manufacturers retooled all their factories to produce it.
It became locked in.
By the time computer keyboards came along, where physical jamming was absolutely no longer an issue, it was economically and socially impossible to switch to a more efficient layout, like the Dvorak keyboard. The early choice locked us into a path that we are still dependent on today, even though the original reason for the choice vanished a century ago.
The past heavily constrains the future. The path creates a dependency. Now, apply that concept to what the Manifesto calls structural DNA.
This is where it gets heavy.
The text is making a profound argument about how power operates. It is saying that if a group achieves power through force, censorship, manipulation, or terror, those exact methods do not just fade away once the power is secured and the new government is formed.
No, they become permanently encoded.
They become the genetic makeup, the DNA of that new system, no matter how noble their original intentions were.
Let's dig into the mechanism of how that actually happens, because it's not magic, it's sociology. Why does the DNA mutate like that?
Right. What's the actual process?
Let's look at the Russian Revolution of 1917. You have a massive empire, the Tsarist autocracy, which is deeply oppressive, deeply unequal. You have a revolutionary movement led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, whose stated goal, the destination, is a stateless, classless, radically equal society, a workers' utopia.
Okay, so if a revolution uses a violent authoritarian structure just to win the war, hoping to establish a free democracy afterward, this text argues that's biologically impossible.
Exactly, because look at what Lenin realized. He realized that to overthrow the Tsar, you cannot rely on loose, decentralized democratic consensus. The Tsarist secret police will just crush you.
So you need a stronger tool.
Right. So in his famous work, What is to be Done, Lenin argues for a vanguard party. A highly centralized, strictly disciplined, secretive, and utterly ruthless organization of professional
The
revolutionaries.
means required to win the war.
Exactly. The means. They established the Cheka, the first Soviet secret police, to root out counter-revolutionaries. They centralize all economic and political power. They use red terror to silence opposition. And it works. They win the Civil War. They achieve power.
And now they have to govern.
Right. Now, according to the stated goals, this is the moment where the state is supposed to begin withering away. The heavy machinery is supposed to drive away so the workers can move into the quiet house.
But the excavator doesn't leave.
It never leaves. Why? Because of path dependence and structural DNA. Think about the individuals who rise to the top of a ruthless, secretive, violent vanguard party during a bloody civil war.
They aren't the peacemakers.
Exactly. They are not consensus-building diplomats. They are not transparent democratic administrators. They are military tacticians, enforcers, and executioners. Those are the skills that were rewarded. Those are the people who survived and thrived.
So when the war ends, and it's time to build the utopia, who is actually in charge?
The enforcers. And what tools do they know how to use? Secrecy, centralization, and violence. What's fascinating here is that the Manifesto treats societal systems like living organisms. A system cannot suddenly mutate its core DNA once it achieves power.
The authoritarianism is now their DNA.
Exactly. The methods used to achieve power, the vanguard, the secret police, the absolute top-down control, literally became the structural DNA of the Soviet Union. It organically evolved into the KGB, the Gulag system, and Stalinism.
It was mechanically impossible for the Bolsheviks to transition to a stateless democracy because the organizational DNA they built to win the war was genetically designed for authoritarian control.
It's a biological lock-in.
That is a staggering way to view history. It basically says that every compromise you make in your methods isn't just a temporary setback. It is a permanent genetic modification to the thing you were trying to build. You can't hire a bunch of ruthless assassins to win a war and then expect them to peacefully govern a democracy.
Because the skills that got them the job are the only skills they have to do the job.
If you lie and manipulate to win a political election, your administration's DNA is fundamentally deceitful. It will require more lies to maintain the power you won through lies. It's inescapable.
It is entirely inescapable.
But this raises a really daunting prospect. If our past and present actions dictate our future structures so rigidly, how do we ever actively build the right future? If we are surrounded by corrupt systems and we can't use corrupt methods to fight them without becoming corrupt ourselves, how do we escape the trap?
Well, the Manifesto provides the answer in its final and perhaps most complex metaphor of the paragraph.
It moves from biology into mathematics. Let's look at the final sentence of point 8. It says, "We apply a fractal strategy. Our methods today must model the society we want to see tomorrow."
A fractal strategy. This is where the philosophy becomes incredibly practical and also incredibly demanding. Let's take a moment to explain what a fractal actually is mathematically, because it's the key to unlocking this entire operating system. In geometry, a fractal is a complex, non-regular geometric shape that exhibits what is called self-similarity across different scales.
Meaning that no matter how close you look or how far back you step, you see the exact same pattern repeating itself endlessly.
Precisely. The macro is a perfect reflection of the micro, and vice versa. Whether you look at a fractal from 10 miles away, or whether you zoom in and look at a tiny fragment of it under an electron microscope, the structural pattern looks structurally identical.
The best visual analogy for this in nature is Romanesco broccoli. Think of Romanesco broccoli or a snowflake.
Oh yeah, the broccoli is a perfect example.
If you've ever seen it at the grocery store, it looks like a bright green alien vegetable. It's made up of these spiraling cones. But if you snap off one tiny little floret of that broccoli and hold it in your hand, that tiny piece looks exactly like a miniature version of the entire head of broccoli. And if you look closely at that tiny floret, it is made up of even tinier florets that also look exactly like the whole. The shape repeats itself at every level of magnification. A snowflake does this too. A jagged coastline does this.
So when the Manifesto talks about applying a fractal strategy to social change, it is demanding that the macro vision, which is a peaceful, equitable, global society, must be perfectly visible in the microscopic actions of our daily lives.
The tiniest piece looks identical to the whole.
Yes. The text demands that your morning meeting, the way you speak to your family, or the way an organization advocates for change, those micro moments must look exactly like the peaceful world you want to build.
It demands total alignment.
It means you can no longer compartmentalize your behavior. You cannot say, I am an activist fighting for global peace and human dignity, so it doesn't matter that I am screaming at my interns, underpaying my staff, and viciously mocking my political opponents online.
The manifesto is saying the way you treat your intern is a fractal.
Exactly. The way you speak to your family at the dinner table is a fractal. The way an organization responds to criticism, those micro moments must look exactly, structurally, like the peaceful world they claim to be building.
If the tiny flora of your daily behavior doesn't look like the broccoli head of your ideal world, then you aren't building that world. You're growing a different plant entirely.
This raises an important question for you listening. How often do your daily methods actually model your ultimate goals? Because this places an immense yet empowering responsibility on the individual. You don't have to wait for the world to change. You simply have to ensure your immediate fractal models the desired whole.
But let me play the ultimate devil's advocate here, because this is where the rubber meets the road. I understand the geometry, I understand the broccoli. But how do you respond peacefully to a bad actor without becoming a victim?
That's the big question.
If I am dealing with a bully, or an abusive boss, or a tyrannical government, and I decide I'm going to use the fractal strategy, I am going to model the peaceful society I want to see. So I act with total peace, transparency, and dignity. And the bully just punches me in the face and takes my lunch money. If I use the fractal strategy against a bad actor, don't I just get crushed? Doesn't this philosophy just mandate passivity in the face of evil?
That is the most common critique of nonviolent philosophy, but it completely misinterprets what the fractal strategy actually entails. Modeling the society you want to see does not mean being a passive victim. It means asserting the rules of the society you want to build, even when the current system rejects them.
Asserting the rules.
Yes. Think about the civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or the Indian independence movement led by Gandhi. They were not passive. They were engaging in highly active, highly disruptive non-cooperation.
Right.
They were actively dismantling the oppressive system, but, and this is the key, they strictly controlled their means.
They refused to adopt the structural DNA of their oppressors.
Exactly. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, she wasn't being passive. She was actively modeling the future society, a society of equality, in that micro moment on the bus. She was planting a seed of dignity.
When protesters engaged in sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, they weren't violently attacking the staff. They were physically modeling an integrated society.
They absorbed the violence of the state, the dogs, the fire hoses, the arrests, but they refused to reflect that violence back. Because if they had formed a violent vanguard party to execute the segregationists, they would have just built a new system with a DNA of violence and execution.
By maintaining a peaceful yet unyielding fractal in their methods, they exposed the brutal reality of the existing system while simultaneously planting the seeds of the new integrated system.
It is mechanically incredibly difficult, and it requires immense courage, but it is the only way to avoid the trap of path dependence.
It's essentially starving the old system of its preferred fuel. The abusive system expects a violent reaction so it can justify its own violence. By refusing to provide that, by modeling a different fractal, you short-circuit the machine.
Thank you.
And we see the negative side of this fractal reality all the time in macro collapses. Look at a massive corporate scandal, like the Volkswagen emissions scandal a few years ago.
Oh, that's a brilliant example.
The macro event was this massive global deception where millions of cars were programmed to cheat on environmental tests. But how did that macro collapse happen? It didn't start with the CEO saying, let's build a global conspiracy to destroy the environment.
No, it rarely starts like that.
It started at the micro level. It started with the fractal of fear. The corporate culture was reportedly so intensely demanding, so unforgiving of failure, where engineers were told, make this engine work within these impossible parameters or you're fired, that a small team of engineers made a micro decision to tweak some software to pass a test.
That micro decision was the tiny floret of Romanesco broccoli. It contained the DNA of deception.
Exactly. And because the culture didn't allow for transparency, that micro-deception fractaled upwards. It became a department-wide deception, then a division-wide deception, until the entire macro structure of the corporation was infected with the same lie.
The methods they use today, fear and cutting corners to meet a deadline, perfectly modeled the disastrous reality they saw tomorrow.
It forces you to look at your own behavior and ask, if everyone on Earth acted exactly the way I am acting right now in this specific argument, what kind of world would we have? And if the answer is a terrible one, then your fractal is flawed. You are failing the formula.
You are.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of point 8. We spent an hour looking at roughly 60 words, and we've watched this text progress through an astonishing, deeply integrated series of frameworks.
Let's review that progression because it highlights the sheer density and brilliance of this single paragraph. By analyzing just these internal concepts, we see a totally unified worldview.
It moves from the philosophical, stating that peace is the path, not a destination, collapsing the journey and the goal.
Then it moves to the botanical, comparing means and ends to seeds and trees, introducing biological determinism.
Then it shifts to the sociological and evolutionary, introducing the law of path dependence and structural DNA, showing how methods permanently mutate institutions.
And finally, it resolves in the mathematical, demanding a fractal strategy, where the micro must perfectly reflect the macro.
It's like watching a camera lens focus sharper and sharper and sharper. Every sentence layers a new scientific or logical discipline over the exact same core ethical concept. By analyzing just these internal concepts of point 8, completely isolated from whatever else the manifesto talks about, we see a totally unified worldview.
It's a worldview where physics, biology, mathematics, and ethics all align to prove exactly one point. The present action determines the future reality.
There's no escape hatch. There is no magic trick where bad actions produce good results. There is no political loophole that allows you to bypass the laws of cause and effect.
The density is very intentional. The authors are building an inescapable logical trap. By tying their argument to the mechanics of seeds growing, or DNA replicating, or fractals repeating, they are making it very difficult to argue against the premise unless you are willing to argue against the basic laws of nature and mathematics.
They are demonstrating that ethical consistency isn't just a nice, warm, fuzzy moral idea for saints and philosophers. It is a cold, hard, structural necessity for building anything sustainable in the real world.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Why did we spend this entire time dissecting a single paragraph of a much larger document? Because, quite honestly, point 8 isn't just a political statement about global peace. When you isolate it and really stare at the mechanics of it, it reveals itself to be a profound self-help philosophy.
It really is.
It is a remarkably effective business management strategy. It's a guide for navigating your personal relationships. It's a framework for evaluating the media you consume and the leaders you follow. All of that utility is packed into these 60 words.
I completely agree. By totally isolating point 8, we realize that the relationship between means and ends is the ultimate, foolproof test of integrity in any field. If you want to know what someone's future end will look like, simply observe their current means.
Right.
If you want to know what a company's future end will look like, do not read their glossy mission statement. Don't look at their marketing. Look at the exact methods they use to treat their lowest level employees today.
If you want to know where a political movement will end up, do not listen to their utopian promises of a glorious future. Look at the methods they are using to gain traction right now. Are they using fear, division, and outrage to build power? If so, the society they build will be defined by fear, division, and outrage. The means will always, inevitably, dictate the end.
Always.
It's a harsh truth, but a deeply clarifying one. We've been on an intense, rigorous journey today through these 60 words. We started by challenging the deeply comforting idea of destinations, learning that the path you walk is the peace you seek.
We dismantled the grand cognitive illusion that the end can ever justify the means, recognizing that you simply cannot cook a pure omelet with rotten eggs.
We explored the strict botanical reality that you can only harvest what you plant. That means are seeds, and the end is the tree.
We then looked at the inevitability of structural DNA, understanding through the law of path dependence that the methods we use to navigate conflicts today will become the permanent, unchangeable architecture of our future systems.
And finally, we explored the beautiful, heavy responsibility of the fractal strategy, the mathematical reality, that our smallest, most microscopic daily actions must be perfectly shaped like the massive macroscopic world we hope to live in.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It takes the abstract, often fluffy concept of peace and turns it into a gritty, immediate, daily mechanical operation.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, a thought that builds strictly on the mechanics of point 8 that we've discussed today. The text forces us to look inward before we look outward at the world. If the law of path dependence is a real mechanical force in the universe, and if your methods today truly are the seeds and the structural DNA of your own personal tomorrow, what kind of genetic code are you leaving in your interactions right now?
That's a powerful question.
Think about the last argument you had with your partner. Think about the email you are drafting in your head right now to a colleague who frustrated you. Think about how you treat service workers when you are in a rush. Are those daily habits, those micro reactions, a fractal of the life you actually want to achieve?
Are you planting seeds of anxiety and harvesting a life of stress while wondering why your goal of happiness keeps eluding you?
Because remember the metaphor we started with. When you are trying to build that beautiful, quiet, serene house of your future, the excavator never actually drives away.
Hmm.
In human life, the tools you are using right now are already mutating into the walls you will have to live inside tomorrow.
Make sure you are using the right tools.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly granular, mind-expanding deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.